when we talk about the pancreas specifically, we have to know how it's supposed to look as a means of comparison for a dysfunctional state, right? So what's the relationship between iron and the pancreas? What does a normal pancreas look like in terms of its iron load? What clues can we take from that normal state that give us an idea of what that would look like if it weren't healthy, right? A state of dysfunction, like a diabetic's pancreas. And is there anything that we can take from that that would lead us to believe that we could fix it? So in a healthy pancreas, it's important to note that iron is an essential catalyst for energy exchange. Okay, so electron transport chain, the ETC, which is our mitochondria's main way, like the only way of it making energy for our cells, it uses iron. It uses iron as a catalyst for creating energy. Okay, not to mention the fact that iron binds the hemoglobin, that's kind of what it's famous for, and delivering oxygen to the cells. The oxygen that is delivered to the cells is used in that electron transport chain. So it's iron. Iron is so important. This is not an anti-iron campaign. This is restoring balance so that iron can be used the way it's supposed to. Okay. Now, this is just a diagram showing you visually how iron is supposed to be used in the cell. I do not expect anyone, including myself, to completely, understand the ins and outs of how the electron transport chain works in cellular respiration. But you can see here, just looking in that key at the bottom, these little doodads here are signifying the presence of iron, right? The iron sulfur complex. These complexes, all with iron in them, serve as catalysts for the mitochondria to do what it needs to do, right? So the mitochondria needs iron in order to produce energy. Now, because iron is synonymous with energy production, what does that mean when it comes to glucose metabolism? Because when we think of glucose metabolism, we also think of energy production, right? So because iron is necessary for iron production, when glucose is present, so is iron. So our body has a way of, when glucose is taken in, iron gets mobilized because your body knows, okay, glucose is here, it's time to make energy. Let me go get my iron to make sure that I have it ready to make that energy happen, right? So for glucose to be used, the cell needs iron, says it needs iron present to help catalyze respiration, okay? So you really can't use glucose without having iron there. You need them both. And now as a diabetic, when you think of taking glucose in, you think, oh, insulin, right? Insulin is the enzyme, the protein that is making sure that glucose can get into the cell where it can be used to create energy, right? So because insulin is required for glucose to get into the cell, and iron is needed to use that glucose properly, insulin and iron have a relationship together, okay? So when we take in glucose, our pancreas reads that, releases insulin. When our body releases insulin, that signifies our body to mobilize iron to be able to use it with the glucose that we just took in so that the cell can make energy. Okay? Let that sink in for a sec. Pause the video if you need to. So again, we've got this love triangle going on, right? So glucose, we eat it, leads to the insulin response, right? Insulin's released. That signifies iron needing to be taken in to make sure that our glucose is used. Make sense? So a healthy cell has all the tools to manage what it needs to do. So when you're thinking of beta cells, because that's what every diabetic is concerned with, the cells most responsible for correctly handling glucose metabolism are beta cells, right? That's not new information. In order to effectively handle glucose, our beta cells need to work. What do we need those beta cells to do? Well, we talked about that insulin release, iron mobilization connection, right? So beta cells recognize the intake of glucose. They release insulin. That, through a series of messengers, lets iron get mobilized so that it can be used. Now, that connection to iron gives beta cells the right to use a very special tool called hepcidin. Okay? If you want to know more about hepcidin, go back to episode 11 to learn more about iron homeostasis in a healthy body. So we're talking a little bit about it here too. So what does hepcidin do? Hepcidin is like the warden of the iron prison yard, right? It is the gatekeeper of letting iron into the cell or out of the cell, right? It is the one determining what balance looks like at any point in time. So it's deciding what's stored in the cell and what's being released into circulation, right? There's a ton of hepcidin in the liver, which makes sense because that's its main storage site. Hepcidin is what is determining if that liver knows to hold on to the iron or if it knows to release it into circulation. Now, an important note here is that alterations in hepcidin function leads to disease states, okay? So those with hemochromatosis, which is iron overload, which is too much serum ferritin, too much in the blood means that we aren't getting iron into the cell, right? So that means we have too little hepcidin. Now, there is another on the opposite state, the opposite side of the spectrum. If you have too much hepcidin and you keep pulling iron into the cell, that means you don't have any in the serum, right? This is called anemia of inflammation. And we'll talk about the mechanism of how that happens a little bit later in the episode. But again, it's just important to note, hepcidin plays a critical role in iron balance. And iron, when it becomes imbalanced, either too high or too low, causes disease states. Let that sink in for a second. So this makes you wonder. Made me wonder. That's why I'm making this video. Have you ever wondered why diabetics don't experience complete pancreatic failure? Right? Why was it just the beta cells that were targeted? Diabetics have functioning alpha cells. We have functioning gamma cells. We have functioning delta cells. The beta cells were the only ones that were targeted and destroyed by the immune system. So what is a unique characteristic? We just hinted about it, and its connection to hepcidin. What makes the beta cells unique that cause them to be the recipient of this immune response, right? So why the beta cells? What do they have that the others don't?